Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome once again to the Van Buren Variety Show. I am Bob Van Buren, your host. Always glad to see who I call my regulars here. They tune in every week for every exciting episode that I've had, so I appreciate the support from y'all. But I also want to say a special shout out to the newcomers that have logged in tonight. This might be your first time to see the show. And if you want to know what this show is all about, well, the title tells you everything. Variety. Every week, I talk to an individual guest about an interesting topic. It might be the person's hobby. It could be a profession. Maybe they've written a really interesting book. Maybe they can play an instrument, just a general interest. It's all right here on Variety. So every week, different guest, different topic, and I couldn't be pleased more with the guests that I've had on the show so far. But most of all, I really thank you, my subscribers and the audience that tune in week after week. Thank you very much. And if you are a newcomer and you like what you see here, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It's down there somewhere if you look real closely. And if you like tonight's guest and you like the topic and all the subject matter we'll cover, make sure you hit that like button too, because we really appreciate that as well. Hope you've all had a great week so far. I have. And let me just kind of give you a little public service announcement. Now, first, as I've said in early episodes, I would never talk politics on this show. I mean, we have enough of that on the network news. But I do want to say I voted today. And as of right now, the polls are either closed or they're about to close, depending on what part of the United States that you're in. And I will say this then with all sincerity. No matter who you vote for, no matter what political party you lean towards, just vote. Because, you look on the map back here, so many of these countries back here are communist. And the citizens of that country, voting is a foreign concept to them, to be able to choose their government. I mean so we live in a country now, we can vote. Doesn't mean your candidate's going to win. Doesn't mean everything's going to go your way, but at least make your voice heard. So hopefully you either voted today, and if you haven't, you better hurry because the polls are kind of slowly closing depending on what time zone you're in. So do your civic duty, no matter if you're in the United States, Canada, or in Europe, Australia, wherever there's free elections, make sure you get your voice heard. And that way, that's a democracy right there. So let's get back to our guest tonight. And I am very honored, and I'm also humbled, ladies and gentlemen, that this guest was on the show last week, and he has so many interesting stories. There was no way we could cover it in one episode. So he has agreed to come on tonight to continue his extremely interesting life. And I know that you will think so too, because I've had so many emails and messages and comments from his previous episode that he was on last week. So make sure, if you haven't watched that one already, make sure you watch that one as well. And we'll continue on tonight. And what I want to get at, ladies and gentlemen, is you never know what kind of influence that you might have to somebody later in life. Maybe you'll never know, but as I said in the speech last week, the seeds are planted. And we never know who we're influencing and who might be making a difference in somebody's life. Well, my next guest that I'll bring on here in a second has. To give you a little bit of a brief summary, he hosted a radio show called the Bluegrass Express. At the time, my maternal grandfather was a huge bluegrass fan. And not only did he listen to this man's show, he recorded it. Every time it was on, he just made recording after recording after recording after recording. My grandfather has passed. He's been unfortunately passed several decades ago. But his recordings lived on, and we've now got them on other electronic media. And I grew up hearing this man's voice, even though we moved far away from where he was recording. And later on, about a year after we moved to the new house, many miles away, my grandfather invited a bunch of amateur musicians to play in his home. He invited all the neighbors, all the relatives, all people around that was interested. And not only did he have these gentlemen play in the middle of their living room, in which I got to witness it as well, he recorded it as well. He loved recording music, especially bluegrass music. Well, unfortunately for my grandfather, he didn't realize that his immature grandson who was 10 years old at the time and should have known better decided he wanted to say something during the recording, during a song. So the DJ's voice from the radio program was Tony Ullrich, whom I will bring on momentarily. But my grandfather played these tapes over and over in my life when I was a little kid. I knew that name. So I decided, well, I can do that as well. So let me play this recording that I'm sure my grandfather was not too happy about. This is me at 10 years old pretending to be Tony Ullrich. Keep listening. This is the Bluegrass Express, and I'm Tony Ullrich. Oh, boy. So, yeah, that's a 10-year-old boy sneaking past his grandfather's microphone and speaking into it, which I'm sure he was none too happy. But the point I'm getting at, Tony Ullrich was such an influence for me because I feel like I grew up with this man, even though I didn't know him personally until just recently. So let's let Bob Van Buren shut up for a while and bring on the one and only Tony Ullrich. Tony, welcome back to the Van Buren Variety Show.
Thank you, Bob. I'm really thinking we need to quit while we're ahead.
Quit while we're ahead?
No, that's fine. I appreciate, and I'm glad that I'm here. And I'm going to, like I said to you in the email this week, that we need to get on to the history of the Bluegrass Express.
Okay.
So I'm going to need to line out some names here that have to do with it. First of all is the publisher of the Houston Chronicle, Jack Don Loftus, who's passed on. Jack and I became good friends because of the radio program. Rick Gardner, all your listeners, you need to get a piece of paper and a pencil to write, because in a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you some info about Rick. And then the late Rod Kennedy of the Kerrville Folk Festivals. Joanne Andera is a lady who ran the Texas Folklife Festival, which I participated in from 78 to 94. And then Jim Goff is a broadcaster and advertising guy. We played a lot of music together. And he actually introduced me to Jim Good in 1972. So wow. I think with that, I need to add my business partner, Gary Henderson, who will come up when we go to the Alamo. And there's some people that I'm forgetting. So, I'm not sure I mentioned Dr. Terry K. Satterwhite. Okay, now those are all people that if I hadn't played banjo and I hadn't done the radio program, I would not have ever known. And this is just so important because all of these people came through my life, and I'm not sure I made their lives better, but they made my lives better.
Well, so, you made a lot of lives better, Tony.
Well, okay, John Lomax, the folk music collector's son, John Avery Lomax Jr., had a stroke in the summer of 71.
Oh, no.
And he was one of the founders of the Houston Folklore Society. And along about October of 1971, there's a folk music hangout here in Houston, which is really important. And it was called the Old Quarter. And it was down at an old building at the Congress in Austin. And I used to go down there. I have pictures of Jerry Jeff, and I have pictures of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band sitting on the stage at the old.
Oh, wow.
And I went down. They had an open mic on Sundays. And so I finally said, well, why don't I just go take the banjo and the guitar to open mic and go down and get on stage and do a little talking and playing. So I got there and signed up. I was first. And there were only about 7 people there. It was on a Sunday night. So I did about 45 minutes. I played banjo guitar and talked about my time in Nashville. And that was it. I got off the stage and packed up. And as I was packing up, a fella came up to me. We're going to call him Ivan K. because I don't want to embarrass him or say anything. I haven't checked with him, so I'm just going to call him Ivan K.
Sounds good to
He,
me.
he came up and he said, I have a Saturday show on KPFT, and I was wondering, I like what you did. Would you come down and do that for me on my show? And I've never been in a radio station. I didn't know what we were talking about, but like a fool, I said, well, yeah. So he called me back, and it was set up for the next Saturday. And I went down there, I was going to go not knowing what to do. And I decided, because I hardly knew anything about KPFT, not to mention I didn't know where it was. So that was back in the days of phone books. Remember phone books?
The Yellow Pages.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yellow Pages. I looked it up, and it was in an old building that backed up to the Hobby Center. And KPFT was on the second floor. And on the first floor was a restaurant called the Bowery, which at the time was very popular. And all the KPFT people, we could always tell the restaurant was open because the food would waft up and filter into the windows of KPFT.
Make you hungry.
So I went down, and I'm glad I did. I went down Friday night before and had a date, and I took her down. We ate at the Bowery, and then we went upstairs. And there were only two ways to get to KPFT. You could go the elevator, or you could take the stairway, or you could take the freight elevator. So we decided to take the freight elevator, and we rode up to the second floor, and the doors opened, and there was this circle of about 25 people who were really angry. They were upset, and I'm going, uh-oh, what did I do now?
Yeah.
And one guy got up and walked up to us and said, yes, what can I help you with? And I said, well, my name's Tony Ullrich, and I'm supposed to be on Ivan K's show tomorrow. And he said, okay, just stand here, and I'll be back in a minute. So he went back and sat down in the circle of 20, 25 people, and you could hear them talking. In about 3 minutes, he came back, and he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. He said, we're having a volunteer strike. And Ivan is one of the broadcasters who has left us. He's quit. So he said, our engineer is here, Paul Yeager, and Paul and I became good friends. He said, our engineer will run the control board, and all you got to do is sit at the mic and play and talk and sing. And I said, okay. And I showed up that next morning at noon. I think it was at noon. And there was Paul, and he sat me down in my side of the control room, and I gave him the records. I brought some of my records to play, and that's how it started. And we did 3 hours. I don't know how I did one.
Wow.
3 hours. And Paul, when I packed up, Paul said, well, you done good. I really enjoyed it. And there was no applause because there wasn't anybody there but us.
Mm-hmm.
So I went home, and I said, well, okay, that was fun. And about 2 weeks later, the fellow called, and the fellow that got up and confronted me was the manager, and his name was Larry Lee. He was the first manager at KPFT. Now, let me talk briefly about KPFT. KPFT is part of the Pacifica Foundation. Pacifica Foundation is a company foundation that has public volunteer radio stations, and I don't know where they are, but at the time I think they were in like 5 cities, and Houston was one of them. And they definitely leaned to the left. I think they had fallen over. They leaned so hard to the left. And I was one of 2 conservatives at the station. There was another fellow who did a conservative talk show, and I can't remember his name, but he lasted about another 2 years, and then he left. And Larry Lee, he called, and he reintroduced himself, and he said, well, we've had a lot of phone calls, and we've had a lot of compliments on what you did on the radio, and we want to know if you would like to take Ivan K's place and build a radio program. And that's how it happened.
That is interesting.
that's how it happened. And so I had 1 week to get my record collection together. And I didn't have that much bluegrass. I had more folk music because I was a Kingston Trio fan.
Oh, I like them too.
So, yeah, me too. So I played a lot of Christopherson, Mickey Newberry, Mac Davis. That was that
Yep.
era.
Hmm.
And bluegrass and some. I had one album of Texas fiddle music, and I played that. I slowly but surely got the feel of it, and I named the show Nashville 3. And I don't remember what my intro was. I think it was the Flint Hill Special, which is one of Earl's. And I outroed with Elton John's Country Comfort. I have always liked Elton John's Country Comfort. It's always been one of my favorite songs. And so that was what I did for about the first 6 months. And then I finally built enough bluegrass. I really wanted to do a bluegrass show. So I went out and I invested in a bunch of albums I didn't have. And that was the era, that was way before the Dillards. Well, it was after the Dillards. So I had the Dillards. I have some bluegrass groups you probably aren't familiar with, but that's irrelevant, not important right now. But it slowly but surely grew. And at some point in time, I changed it to the Bluegrass Express, which was out of respect for the Osborne brothers. Yeah, they had a recording called the Bluegrass Express.
I have that song.
That became my intro at some point in time.
Let me talk to the audience real quick. Audience and people listening to this, I would highly recommend you either go to YouTube or Spotify or wherever you hear your music. Look up a song called Bluegrass Express. It's performed by the Osborne brothers. And that was actually Tony's intro to his show, which was also called the Bluegrass Express. And when I hear that song, Bluegrass Express by the Osborne brothers, it really takes me back to your show, Tony, and when my grandfather was listening to his recording. So had to kind of expand on that some. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Okay, now I want to stop here because this is really important to everybody watching. If you got a pencil and paper.
Yeah, okay. Make sure everybody has their pencil and paper.
Okay. I want to talk about Rick Gardner. Rick Gardner was one of my early banjo students, and he was a poor boy. He only has 3 degrees from Rice University. He's still learning, and he decided to be an architectural photographer, which he spent his life doing. And he started, when we get to the Kerrville Folk Festival, he started attending almost every one of them, if not, and he photographs. And he has a whole lifetime of photographs that are available to the public. So let me give you first of all, this is real quick, rickgardnerphotography.com. No I in Gardner, it's Gardner. rickgardnerphotography.com.
Okay.
His email is rick@rickgardnerphotography.com. And he also, a lot of his life of work, if you go to Facebook and type in classic bluegrass pictures, Facebook classic bluegrass pictures. Now this guy, most of the photographs we're going to look at tonight.
Looking forward to it.
We're taken by Rick. I'll point him out as we go. And Rick gave me mucho support during the years, but the main thing is his love for photography that he took with his camera and did at the bluegrass festivals. And I'm not sure, but I think he probably did some of Rod's other festivals. The first, obviously, was the folk festival in '72. So anyway, that is a commercial ad, but
that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that at all.
For you who are interested in photographic proof of bluegrass in Texas, that's a huge vacuum that you can fill in your life. Okay. Hi, Rick. I'm hoping he's watching. I don't know if he's.
Oh, I'm sure he is. We got a lot of people watching right now.
Okay, now we're in that was October of '71 when I did that, and I got on the air with KPFT in late October, early November '71. And '72, the Bluegrass Express was flourishing. And one day I got a call from Rod Kennedy, whom I didn't know at the time, but he was the producer of the original Kerrville Folk Festival. And he asked if he could come do an interview on my show. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And he got there and we did a whole show on the upcoming first Kerrville Folk Festival, which was the first 2 years were in the Kerrville Auditorium.
And I got a flyer I'll display. This one here?
Yeah, that is, oh, yeah, yes. That is the first, that's the poster of the 72 inaugural Folklife Festival. Dick Barrett was a world-class fiddle player. Alan Dameron was one of Texas' best folk singers. He's passed on. Steve Fromholtz was one of the funniest guys I ever knew, and he's passed on. John Lomax, my John, did a show. And then there's Mance. That was when I had already met Mance when the kept festival. There's Michael Murphy, and there's Threadgill. People who know the history of Austin know Kenneth Threadgill. Robert Shaw, I don't remember, and I don't remember Texas Fever. But that, because I was working, that is the poster of the first 1972. And as I said, the first two were held in the city auditorium, and Rod appointed me and a guy named John Hargis to be the security guard. So we had to sit at either end of the stage area to keep all the people drunks out who wanted to get him. So that's funny. Yeah, so that was my job. The first 2 years were chief of security, and a fellow named John Hargis. And John is faded. I don't know. I don't know him all that well. We had 2 good years, and that's it. So that was the beginning of Kerrville and Rod Kennedy. I worked every one of Rod Kennedy's festivals, from the Folk Festival of 72 to the Bluegrass Festival of 1978, which was Labor Day. And at that time, at the end of that Bluegrass Festival, my campmobile just was done. I couldn't, it was just time to not be at Kerrville. So 78, the Bluegrass was my last festival. I had more fun, and it was time to do something else and be somewhere else.
And for the people, Tony, real quick, for the people that maybe do not know where Kerrville is, maybe they're from out of state, where exactly is Kerrville exactly?
Kerrville is that way.
It's that way, huh?
Yeah, okay.
Look on the map.
I can tell you, this is how I got to Kerrville. You go west on I-10 to Luling. Okay. You take a right, go through Luling. There's a turn off to the left that'll take you to Blanco. You take that road to Blanco. You turn right, you go into Blanco. You drive up, and there's a sign that says Lukenbach. You take a left, and you go straight forever. It's like a 3-hour drive, which it's not. And that dead ends to a farm to market. You take a right, and you go across the creek, and you go about 100 yards, and you turn left, and there's Lukenbach. Now,
did you get that, folks?
Now, when you leave Lukenbach, you go left out of Lukenbach, and you go to the highway, which is the highway to Lyndon Johnson's ranch. And there's a KOA on the corner. There was a KOA on that corner where I used to camp. And then you turn left and you go into Fredericksburg. And then you go through Fredericksburg, and there's the road to Comfort, which takes you to Kerrville.
Okay, we got it, right? Yep. Put that in our GPS.
That was my route for getting to Crouch Ranch and to Kerrville and to Fredericksburg.
We got it. Okay.
Okay, shall we go on?
Yeah, please, go ahead, yes.
Okay, I'd like to go back and talk about Terry K. Satterwhite. Dr. Terry K. Satterwhite was Baylor Med. He was lead teacher, I think, in the infectious disease department. Kerry started taking lessons in 72, and he took for over 20 years. And basically, I don't know, should I tell this? Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Okay. Why not?
Okay.
We're all standing by with bated breath.
Okay. I went up on my lesson rate, and I don't know what year it was. I was teaching at Memorial Music, and I told him that I was going to go up a dollar to $25 an hour, and he looked at me and he said, "Ullrich," He was from North Carolina, and North Carolinians, some of them have a habit of calling you by your last name. He never did call me, never has called me by my first name, which is okay. And he said, Ullrich, he said, I can either pay you $25 an hour, or I can pay a psychiatrist $125 an hour. Now, what do you think I'm going to do?
Oh, man.
That is a true story. And he's a wonderful guy. Well, we're still in touch. And that was, he supported. He gave me a lot of emotional support during that time. And besides being a student, and I will always be thankful for him as a student, and more than that, for a friend. So we've taken care of Rod Kennedy. And I don't want to forget. I'll get to that. I won't forget.
Okay, no problem.
There's Joanne Andera. She was the leader of the Texas Folklife Festival, which was over at the Institute of Texan Cultures.
Okay.
And I had been invited to be a stage manager and a performer at the Texas Folklife Festival the same summer that I did the last year at Kerrville. 78 was my first year. And I stayed there through 94. So I was a stage manager and a performer. And we stage managers had to shuffle and take care of all the groups. And I had two different stages that I bounced between. And stage 5, I got a stage that was mainly dancing groups, which I was not familiar with. And I did okay. Nobody fired me. But I have one happy thing that I want to tell. They had a group that were called the Flemish Dancers.
Flemish Dancers.
The Flemish Dancers. And they was the first time, and I'm not familiar with the country Flemlin. So I just went on, and that's the joke. When I introduced them, I didn't know what country Flemish were from. So I just said, well, I'd like to intro the group here all the way from Flemlin.
Flemlin?
All the way from Flemlin were the Flemish Dancers. And there was this silence for about 3 seconds. And then the audience just busted out. I had no idea that was going to be funny. And I looked at the Flemish Dancers, and they were all looking up at the sky.
Like, oh no.
And after it was all over with, they said that was, continue to do that. Everybody enjoyed it. So whenever, I think they had 3 more over 2 days. I think I had to induce them 3 more times. And I did it. The audience loved it, and they did too.
Instead of Flemlin.
Yeah, Flemlin. So that was one of my happiest moments. And
I love it.
There was the Folklife Festival. They had 15 stages, and one of the stages were the Duckins family. They were from, I think, Fort Bend County somewhere, and they were an African American gospel group.
Oh, okay.
And they had their own stage, and they brought more people to their knees with tears. My dad cried, and I did too, and they were just wonderful. I don't know if they're still doing but they had some older family, they had younger people, and they had rehearsed. They were very good, and it was just very, very emotional. If you went over there, you could just count on being moved. So
what was the name of their group again?
Duckins.
The Duckins. Okay.
Duckens, Duckins family.
Okay.
And I have a lot of memories. Alan Dameron, the past folk singer, was an icon here in Texas. And they had bluegrass groups on stage 3, and they had all sorts of music. They had conjunto, they had 3-button accordion, guitarron, and a fiddle. And they had mariachi, and it was a wonderful festival. And the interest started deteriorating, and they started cutting back in 94. And I got a letter from Joanne Andera thanking me for the years and saying that she was sorry, but they were cutting back on staff. And that was it. But I was ready to go. I had 78 to 94.
You had a good time. Good time.
Good time, and I met a lot of wonderful people, and seems like okay. I think that takes care of the radio station, and
Interesting.
goes to. I guess we need to go to Lukenbach.
Okay.
Is that all right?
That's fine. Now you're talking about radio. Does this fit into what we were talking about just now, or is this something else?
Oh yeah, those bumper stickers. There's my cowboy show. We're going to talk about Gabby in a little while.
Okay, that's fine.
And after I left public radio, if you look at that Gabby's Cowboy Corral KYND, that was a new radio station, and the late Don Janicek. See the Don's record? Don was my principal advertiser, and I just couldn't make a go of it, and that was the end. That was the end of the radio.
Okay.
It was just time to do something else. I had established one thing: teaching banjo.
Yes, definitely.
Well, when I was trying to develop the show, I just felt kind of empty, so I decided one Saturday to bring the banjo and demonstrate. And I brought the banjo and I started playing, and I'd pick a song and I would demonstrate a lick that was on the record. And I just thought that was kind of neat. And then that was when I started getting phone calls for lessons. And I had no idea that was going to happen. And there is that is the online lesson site right there. That's those are individual lessons on technique, and it's only $7.95 a month. You can't get better than Rick Gardner, Gary Henderson, my longtime business partner, and I put together about 250 individual lessons for people. So thank you. That's it. That is the online lessons, and the other one is the private lessons into history. Yeah, that's BanjerProductions.com. That talks about private lessons here in Houston.
Right there, ladies and gentlemen.
And they can also reach me at Anton. That's my real name, Anton at BanjerProductions.com. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Now that was where the teaching started, and I'd like to throw this in. That was 1972, and that was the year of the movie Deliverance.
Oh, we all know the movie Deliverance.
And
wow!
That was coincide with me and the licks. That was where my student base began.
The banjos.
Yeah, it was because of
dueling banjos.
Yeah, because of the movie Deliverance, and there were other year factors that a lot of people. 1967 was the year of the movie Bonnie and Clyde, which was a gigantic lift for bluegrass music. Bonnie and Clyde was 67, and so was also the Osborne Brothers and Rocky Top.
Oh, that's it. Yep, I remember that.
Rocky Top and Foggy Mountain Breakdown were.
Oh yeah, those are good ones.
Were 1967, and 72 was Deliverance, and that was when I began teaching. At one point in time, 1972 and 73, I had the maximum. I could not do that today. This would kill me, but I had 41 hourly students.
41?
Yeah, between 72 and 75. And that was, I taught banjo, I played banjo, and I did the radio program, and I discovered that I think I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. So what I did was I stopped practicing, and I got through it. And it was, I think I was on the verge, and it was too much, but I found that out. And we need to go to John Lomax.
Okay, let's do that right now.
Yeah, John had the stroke in the summer of 71. And I was already.
That's him?
Yep, that's me. And that was Memorial Park, March 3rd, 1973.
Okay.
That was the worst banjo I ever owned. That was a Fender.
Oh, was it? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's okay. I got back to Gibson very quickly. Okay, that's a tree in Memorial Park, and John and I just happened to be there. Thank you.
Nice picture. Yeah,
Okay,
for example.
okay. I was already established. I forgot this, but in October of 1971, I was elected president of the Houston Folklore Society. And Martha Williford, who's now Martha Williford Jorgensen, was elected vice president. And that'll come in when we go to Jack Loftus. And so I was president of the Houston Folklore Society. I was doing the radio program, and I had begun teaching. And one day, this was like mid March of '72, I got a call from Camilla Horn. Camilla Horn was the secretary treasurer of the Houston Folklore Society, and she was a New Yorker.
New Yorker.
Yeah, she had pictures of her with Woody Guthrie and the Weavers and Josh White, the black folk singer Josh White. So she actually knew these people, and she was a factor in the Folklore Society, Houston Folklore Society, regardless of who was president. And she called me one day and said, "Tony, Alan Lomax is here, and he wants to talk to you." And I'm going, okay, I've never met Alan Lomax. He's much more famous. He's up in Washington. He's running the Library of Congress. He's with the Smithsonian. What could he possibly want with me? And she said, get over here at the Lomax house. And I said, well, I can be there in a couple of hours. And she said, get over here as fast as you can. So I got over there, and there was the one and only Alan Lomax.
Alan Lomax.
And
wow.
Camilla was there, and he introduced himself, and he said, we got a situation here. And so this is where we get into John. And I love John Lomax so much. John was founder of the Folklore Society. He was an icon. He was a home builder. He was actually a home builder who did the folk music whenever he was called on. And he was a very successful home builder. And he had the stroke. And the next thing is, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but his wife, Mimi, who was just the sweetest thing you ever knew, had decided that she was going to take care of John all by herself. And they were in their mid-60s, and it turned out to be an overload for her, and she was having a nervous breakdown.
Oh, no.
Very, very sad. And what they had determined that they needed to get her into treatment. And so that was what do we do with John? So the family had talked, and they had decided that John, they had consulted the doctors, and the doctors had said he doesn't need a white coat. He doesn't a nurse. He said John needs a companion. He needs somebody like him who loves music. And I came up, and I had a job, and I was not happy with the job. I won't go into that. But Alan said, we'd like to offer you the job of moving into the garage apartment, which they had just completely redecorated, and it was a nice apartment. We'd like you to move into the garage apartment and be John's companion every day. Now, I didn't have to spend the day with him, but I had to spend part of the day with him, and we do music. The Lomax family had it's called double solitaire, and I'm not a chord person, but
I've heard of it, but I've never played that.
I've got the Lomax family loved solitaire, and their longtime maid, who was Addie Collins, I talked with her a bunch, and she said they just got crazy when they all started playing double solitaire. And she laughed, and she loved them also. And John and I, the part of John's brain was wiped. Oh, I can tell the story. John was at the Downtown Y, and he was playing handball with a good friend, and that was when he had the stroke. Now, here are the amazing circumstances. There were two surgeons playing handball on the next court. There was an ambulance parked there at the Downtown Y that they couldn't figure out why there was an ambulance parked there. So the surgeons, the doctors on the next saw it happen, and they came over and they administered what they could. And somebody said, well, there's an ambulance there, which they loaded him up and they got him to the nearest hospital, which I don't think it was St. Joseph. It was one downtown. It may have been St. Joseph. But they got him there with all of that, the factors of the two surgeons in the next court, the ambulance that wasn't supposed to be there. They got him to the hospital and they saved him. But all that happened when you could, if John were alive today, you could talk to him and he'd be normal. And then you could talk to him and 5 minutes later, you could ask him about the same subject and he wouldn't remember that we had talked about it.
Short-term memory loss.
There was a part of the brain that had been killed or disabled. Yeah. And John remembered everything in his life from the moment of the stroke back, but he couldn't hold on. Part of my responsibility was his medicine every day. And they also wanted me to test him for memory recovery. So every time I'd give him his medicine, and I'd wait for 10 minutes, 5 minutes. And I'd say, John, have you had your medicine? And he'd always get that look on his face and he'd say, no. And then on the one time he did, he said yes. And I said, well, okay. And I waited another 10 minutes and came back and he didn't remember. So that was hard. That was really hard.
Really hard for sure.
And then they decided that they needed to get John out of town to get treatment. They just need to separate Mimi and John. So they handed me a checkbook of traveler's checks of $2,500, and they said I had one of those 71 Volkswagen Campmobiles, the pop top.
Yeah.
I had one of those. I love that time. I had that from 71 to 78, and I just went all over with that. That was half a Lukenbach. So anyway, they said, well, we want you to go over to Austin and visit with John Henry Falk, which they had made arrangements. Now, I didn't know who John Henry Falk was, but let me brief the audience. John Henry Falk was a radio star in New York. He was one of the most popular radio guys in New York, and he was a victim of the McCarthy era.
Oh, you know your history. We know what happened in the McCarthy era.
And one really good thing was John Henry. Back then, he got an attorney named Louis Nizer, N-I-Z-E-R, Louis Nizer. And Louis Nizer was his defense attorney, and John Henry won. And Louis Nizer wrote a book titled Fear on Trial. And if anybody's interested in it, but it was John Henry's trial, and he was exonerated. And I'm not sure because all the intervening years, but he ended up in a little farm down at Centerville, up at Centerville, north of Houston. And I have photographs of John and me and his wife, Elizabeth, that he's out in his vegetable patch doing vegetables. And I got some real cute photographs of one of the great radio guys of the 40s. And so we went and visited with him. We stayed about 3 days, and we stayed in that Howard Johnson's down on the river, on the lake. And then we came back to Houston, and then they said, well, we need you to go again. So we went up to Lubbock because John's oldest sister, the oldest of the Lomaxes, was Shirley Lomax Mansell, and she lived in Lubbock, and she was a widow. So we went up to Lubbock, and we stayed with her about 2 weeks. And then, as near as I can remember, that was when I got the phone call at Lubbock, and I'm not sure who it was, but they told me to keep going. And I said, go where? And they said, you got a camper and you got John and you got the traveler's checks. Go west, young man.
I've heard that one before.
Until we call you to come home. So John and I took off, and I got a map. I had no idea, and I'm not going to belabor this, but we ended up with 27 national parks, 4,800 miles over 9 weeks. and we got as far as Zion. We got to that. I got a funny story I got to tell. We stopped at Moab for gas, Chevron. And when we left, I had forgotten to put the gas cap back on.
Oh, no.
So we got a T-shirt. I got a T-shirt and cut it up and stuffed it in the gas. And at that time, to get around Utah, you had to go north to the top of the state and then come down the west side. In between was canyon lands and land that you couldn't go through at that time. So I put a cloth in the gas cap, and we went north, and we got to Capitol Reef National Park. We stayed there about 4 or 5 days, and then we went on to we went to Zion, and what was before that one? I can't think. I've hit a blank.
In Utah?
And, what's the big pretty one with all the
Ogden? Is it Ogden?
No, it's a national park.
Oh, national park in Utah. Audience, if you think of a national park in Utah, let us know.
Okay, let's go. So we went across, and we came down, and we got to Zion, which was the furthest point west. We got to a motel, and this was a Saturday night, and there was a Volkswagen dealership. So I got to thinking, I'm going to go get me a gas cap, which I did. Now, this ought to help. It was theft, but I needed a gas cap. And I don't know who, no.
Was it Monument Valley?
No, is that Tom? No, hey, Tom.
Tom Easley.
Yeah, it's one of my students.
Okay.
No. Okay, let's keep going.
Keep going, yeah. A good guess, though, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah. So I got a call that we could come home. So I sloughed over to the Volkswagen dealership after dark, of course, and I wrote out a traveler's check for $25, and I put a note on the Volkswagen. I took the gas cap, I put a note on the Volkswagen, and I said, this $25 ought to cover the gas cap. I need it in an emergency or something. And then I went back to the motel, and that was it. And that's when the phone call said, you need to start home. So we did. We started back east. And we went to we went through Flagstaff coming back, and we went to White Sands. That was a couple of places. And when we left White Sands, there was this mountain. It wasn't a mountain. It was kind of a hill mountain. And I checked my map, and it took me over to Socorro, New Mexico, and Interstate 25. So we went over that, and I found out later on that there was a poem written by the cowboy artist Baxter Black.
I know who Baxter Black is, yes.
Which he talks about the plains of San Augustine, where one of the ranches he apparently worked at or something. And I looked at the map, and there it was. It said Plains of San Augustine on the map, and I went, oh my gosh, this is the place that's in Baxter Black's poem. So that was and it went up and up and up and up, and then all of a sudden it comes down, and there's 25, and you go left to go into Socorro. And we went right, I think, to pick up 10. And we came back on 10, and that's about it. I forgot. We still have 10 minutes.
I sure do. Yeah, you got plenty of time. Go ahead, we're listening.
On the trip with John Lomax, we covered 4,800 miles. We also made 2 trips to the Big Bend because there were several professors at Alpine. What's the college at Alpine? I've forgotten. There's a college at Alpine that it'll probably come to me. This 81 is not fun. Okay,
you're doing great.
This Alpine, there were several professors who were personal friends of the Lomaxes. So John and I went to Sul Ross University. John and I got a motel at Alpine, and we stayed there 2 or 3 days. And drank beer and had steaks with those professors.
Sounds fun to me.
And then we drove on to Big Bend, and we stayed there for 2 weeks. And there's something that I'm missing. Oh, the morning out of Alpine to go back to Big Bend, I was driving along in that Campmobile, and all of a sudden it went thump, thump. And I looked in the rearview mirror, and there was a rattlesnake that almost covered the entire width of the highway. And we went back, and I had killed it, I guess, and I wasn't going to mess with it. But it actually hit that rattlesnake, running over that rattlesnake, actually rattled the whole Campmobile. It was that large. And we kept going, and we went back, and I'm forgetting all sorts of stuff. But
it's interesting.
One story, and I'd like to go ahead and tell a story about to end this. I see we're getting close.
Yeah, please. We're all listening. It's all interesting, Tony.
Dow Patterson, and it looks like we're going to run into a third Tuesday. We'll cover Lukenbach and Dow and Becky and all that.
Okay.
Next week. One night, it was done. I can go ahead. I'm not going to save this. This relates to how things in your life intersect and what happens. I was leaving the Crouch Ranch to go to Kerrville to the motel. This was after the wedding. And I was driving over that hilly Comfort onto Kerrville. And I came up over a hill, and there was a bunch of debris in the roadway, and there was one headlight. But this was 2:30 in the morning, and I drove on, and my mind, okay, there's something wrong there, go back. So I U-turned and went back, and there was all of the debris in the road and the headlight, and I looked off to my right, and I could see a car. It was down, and I couldn't tell what was going on, so I turned around, and I pulled off, and I shut the engine down, and I walked down, and there was a young guy who had been killed, and it was probably a deer. You have to watch for deer in hill country.
That's true. That's very true.
I don't know, because I didn't. His car had gone down the hill through a fence and into a tree, and this was before seat belts. This was and he was dead. I could tell he was dead.
Oh, how terrible.
And, yeah, well, okay, here you are. I mean, everybody listening, here you are. What do you do? Well, I couldn't help him. It was obvious because it had happened X amount of time ago, and he was motionless. So I got in the car, and I drove into Kerrville, and my goal was to find a policeman. So I didn't know where the Kerrville Police Department was, so I took a right and going down what's kind of the main drag, and there was a restaurant, and there was a highway patrol car.
Oh, wonderful.
So that part of my problem was solved. So I got out of the car, and I went inside, and there was this policeman, and I introduced myself, and I told him about the headlight frame and the rocks in the road and the car with the dead person in it. And he said, you take me back there, will you? And I said, well, of course. So I got in my car, and he got in his, and he followed me back. And we parked our cars. He had his flasher. This was like 3:30 in the morning, probably now.
Wow.
And he went down to the car and checked the body and got the identification. He came back up, and he said, I really appreciate you stopping me and telling me. And he said, you're going to find this hard to believe, but this young man is the son of the owners of the restaurant you were just in.
Oh, wow. Full circle.
And I remember that. It's not necessarily to know the name. It was a very German name. But the wreck that I discovered was the son of the people who own that restaurant.
That you were just at.
Yeah,
wow.
That's a Ripley's, believe it or not.
That is spooky.
It's what happened.
Well, like I said at the beginning of the program, Tony, some things are just meant to be.
Yep.
You know?
Well, I
Call it
think so.
fate.
I think so. It was quite an experience.
Wow.
Okay, how we doing?
We're doing great. Man, we're all interested in. I mean, you've got a lot of history that we haven't covered, but we will cover that.
Yeah.
So, but you said there was. I got to bring this up. You said there was a story on this,
On what?
and I don't know if you want to cover that right now or wait till next week. It's about a license plate. You know which one I'm talking about?
No, let's cover that now. Well,
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here is a license plate, and I'm going to display the license plate, but I'm going to let Tony tell the story because even I don't know the story. So here's the license plate, ladies and gentlemen, and Tony, I'll let you tell it, and I can tell by your face it's going to be very, very amusing. So here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, it's all yours, Tony.
okay, well, Doc Watson and Earl Scruggs all call the banjo Banjer.
Not a banjo, banjer.
Oh, I say Banjer. And this is a 72 plate, so I had to apply for this plate in 71.
Okay.
And I kept it all the way through 90 or 91, and each year I would send the plates. I would have them mounted like that one. That one's mounted on a nice oak or whatever it is. And I would send it to people that I admired and liked. And the list is over there, and I didn't even think about that. But that is, I got Banjer. I thought of Banjar, Jar. No, I thought of Jor because that's too close. So I chose Banjer, and that's where BanjerProductions came from. And I applied for a service mark, which I've had since 1972. So that is the first year. That is the first year. And I'm going to get up. Keep it right there.
Okay.
Oh, gosh, I forgot about the ear. Hold on.
Oh, no problem. We're still looking at the plate. So, ladies and gentlemen, while Tony's getting some extra information, let you know that he will be back next week. And we've got pictures we haven't even seen yet. So you might want to tune in next week as well. So, okay, Tony, go back. We're back at the plate again.
Can you show the one where I'm holding the plate off my shoulder? I thought that was the one you were going to show.
Let's see. I'm looking for that one. Plate on your shoulder.
Yeah, it's on my left shoulder. I'm holding it like you're being arrested.
Let's see. I got a bunch of them.
Well, it should be right next to the other one.
Yeah. Maybe I didn't get it downloaded. Yeah, I don't see it, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'll keep looking while you're telling the story, though. Go ahead.
Okay, go back to the screen. Go back to the screen.
Oh, not that one. This one. Okay.
Now, no, bring me back.
I'll bring you back.
Yeah.
Okay, there you are.
Here is the sesquicentennial plate.
From 1986.
From my banjo, which we'll talk about eventually, my Deering Ullrich Texas sesquicentennial banjo. That is the 86 plate, which I really treasure. I'll give that to somebody someday. I'm not sure who. Okay, that's it.
And you know what? Let me just kind of give some information here. I had some older family members. You're talking about they called it banjer instead of banjo. I had older relatives that used to say, like, they wouldn't say, like, hey, look at that out the window. They'd say, look at that out the window. Really? Or they would say, the color yellow, it was yeller.
Yeah.
Well, that's just the way they talked back then.
Sounds like hee-haw right down. Country people talk like that.
And my grandfather, the Bluegrass fan, he was a hee-haw fan as well, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I was too. I could talk about it. Hee-haw was on while I was in Nashville. I forgot all about that.
Wow.
When you see reruns of hee-haw, which are on some channel, I think, or they should be.
They're out there, yes.
You go to the credits. If you go to the credits at the end, it's an orange background, and you go through the credits, and you'll see the name Sandy Lyles.
Sandy Lyles, all right.
Sandy and I became friends when I was in Nashville. She had just graduated from high school, and she had gotten a job at the CBS affiliate there, which is where Hee Haw was filmed. The first 2 or 3 years of Hee Haw were filmed in the basement of the CBS affiliate. And I've visited there
Wow.
many times. I got to play on Bobby Thompson's old banjo one time, and I spent a lot of time there. And I
That's
probably
cool.
need, but you'll see her name. She started out at the affiliate as a high school graduate, and she worked her way up to where
That's awesome.
she was a big center of gravity of activity for Gaylord Productions.
Okay.
Okay.
Before we go, though, Tony, I want to show your website one more time for our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear more about Tony, especially his banjo lessons, I have one of his websites there. That's https TonyUllrich.com.
Those are the online single individual banjo lessons.
And then I have this one right here, www.BanjerProductions.com.
Yeah, that lines out about taking live lessons here in Houston.
Okay.
Which this is my 50th anniversary.
Congratulations. Well,
1972 was the year that I began teaching here. So somehow I've survived, and so have most of my students, I think.
Well, I can say for one, especially your students, we appreciate you sharing your talent.
Well, I'll get reorganized. I think we can fill one more hour, at least. If not, we'll tap dance or something.
We'll do it.
All right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all for my show tonight. But just let you know, this was part 2. Now, this is going to be part 2 of 3. So Tony will be back next week, and we got a lot more of pictures. And if you ask him really nice, ladies and gentlemen, he might play the banjo for you. So be nice, ask really nice, and if you have a request, maybe he can play it for you. Maybe we'll let that up to be up. Let that up to Tony. All right.
I'm thank you again. I'm thankful that somebody is interested in.
Absolutely.
Well, okay. And
thank you, Tony.
I'll be ready next week for one more hour.
We're looking forward to it. We stand by with bated breath. Thank you again, Tony.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, sometimes, an hour can just seem like it drudges on and on. But, man, talking to Tony, it seems like an hour just goes by way too fast, There's so many more interesting stories that he's got that he has shared with me and some of his photos that you haven't seen yet. So if you like what you've seen so far, I highly recommend next Tuesday. That will actually be what? Tuesday, November the 15th, 2022. So if you're watching this live, make sure you tune in next week. That's going to be all for me tonight, but I also want to do a special thank you. Those of you that are watching on Van Buren Variety, my channel right now, thank you for that. If you're a first-time person, subscribe. But I also want to say a special shout-out and thank you to the other YouTube channel, Texas Front Porch, who is allowing me to simulcast on their channel. So if you're watching this on Texas Front Porch, thank you very much for the support. But please go over to Van Buren Variety and hit that subscribe button and hit that like button. I'm sure would like to get some more subscribers on my side. So again, to you, the viewers, whether you're just a subscriber or whether you're first time, thank you so much for the support. Would love to see you again. And especially a thank you to Tony Ullrich for sharing his life's interesting stories. So that's all from me tonight. And I hope you all have a great week. This is Bob Van Buren for the Van Buren Variety Show. Thank you all and have a good night.